All right, good morning, everyone, and welcome to ARE Discussions. This is a monthly webinar series that hosts experts to discuss issues facing California's agricultural and natural resource communities. My name is Tina Saitone, and I'm a Cooperative Extension Specialist in the Department of Agricultural and Resource Economics at UC Davis. This series is being organized and hosted by cooperative extension specialists in agricultural and resource economics across 3 UC campuses. Brittany Goodrich and myself are at UC Davis. Mehdi Namadi is a specialist at UC Riverside, and Ellen Bruno is a specialist at UC Berkeley. Before we get started, just a couple housekeeping items. This webinar will run for an hour and 20 minutes. We'll have about 20 minutes of guided question and answer with each of our esteemed guests, followed by question and answer from the audience that Ellen Bruno will be moderating. So throughout the webinar, please be submitting your questions via the question and answer box at the bottom of your screen. Our webinars are being recorded, and webinars from throughout our series are available on our website, which is arediscussions.ucdavis.edu. Today, we're very excited to have 2 speakers that are going to be talking about the California citrus industry, considering some of the economic impacts and challenges. To lead us off today, Mehdi is going to lead a discussion with Bruce Babcock, who is a professor in the School of Public Policy at UC Riverside. And then Brittany will be talking with Ariel Singerman. Ariel is an assistant professor and an extension economist in the Department of Food and Resource Economics at the University of Florida. So at this time, I'd like to turn it over to Mehdi.
Thank you, Tina. Let's start the discussion with Dr. Babcock. Bruce, can you please share your slides with us if you have any? Oh, yeah, perfect. So to start, Bruce, can you give us a little bit background on the California citrus industry with this focus on the trends in citrus crops compared to other important crops in California?
Sure. I prepared some slides to kind of give a picture of how citrus fits in with the kind of dynamics of California agriculture. And so what I want to do is just kind of share some thoughts about how the citrus industry has evolved over the last couple decades relative to other changes that are going on. So might as well just start right with the most famous when you think about California citrus, you think about oranges. So think about what's been going on with oranges. And really 2 kinds of oranges have been produced in California are navel oranges and Valencias. And so what we have here, the blue line shows overall orange acreage, bearing acreage in California. You can see that a smaller and smaller share of oranges in California are the Valencias. And so this is a theme about, when a crop falls out of favor with consumers, then what you see are California producers responding to the changes in the marketplace. And so that'll be a theme throughout my discussion today. And so Valencias are harder to peel. They're more of a juice variety than a fresh variety. They can be eaten fresh. But so they have fallen out of favor a bit with consumers. So you see Valencias going down. And then it seems like in the last few years, you've also seen some a stagnation in demand growth for navel oranges. And so you're seeing some actual decline in navel orange acreage in California, which is kind of surprising. If we go to looking at lemons, so when you think about citrus, you think about navel oranges, you think about lemons. And California, so what I have here, the blue line here is US acreage of lemons since 1980, and you can see that it's been declining over time. And California kind of followed the national trends for a while, but then it reversed, and so an increasing share of lemons in the United States come from California. one big change that occurred is an elimination of a marketing order. Now, why do I bring that up? Because in the past, you had a lot of marketing orders was the way that California agriculture was kind of organized and how they tried to increase returns to growers by restricting supply. But over time, those restrictions in supply kind of interfere with a more market-oriented agriculture that I think we have today. And so what you saw in the marketing order was an increasing share of the crop being put into the processing market. And so one big change that you've seen in California is much more of a focus on fresh market production because that's where the money is. And so once they got rid of the marketing order, a larger share of the lemon crop actually went into the fresh market, and California has actually benefited from that. And you see that a large share of lemons is now grown in California. Then you get to the big change that we've seen. So those are even though they didn't seem like major changes with navel oranges and lemons, it did reveal that the dynamic market-oriented aspects of California agriculture, and nothing shows that better than the huge growth in mandarin. So what happened to mandarins, since it took off in about 2005, mandarin acreage has grown by an annual rate of 11%, and California has captured just about all the U.S. mandarin production. And so what happened? Well, you had scientific discovery that developed a new product that met consumer desires. So easy peel mandarins were already around, but they had a bunch of seeds. So when you took the seeds out of an easy peel, tasty piece of fruit, consumers responded dramatically, and growers in California responded to that consumer demand. You also had major companies involved with mandarins, and they were highly successful at marketing the Cuties brand, for example. And so you had a branded mandarin, a lot of capital flow into that, and you can see the tremendous growth we've seen in the mandarin market. The dynamism that you see with citrus, it also, you got to think about, okay, citrus isn't in isolation. That is, you're not trading off lemons and mandarins for navel and Valencia. That is, the citrus that does not live in an island in itself. When you talk about the citrus industry in California and the changes today and tomorrow, you have to think about the rest of the crops. And the big change in California, besides the mandarin, has been a tremendous growth we've seen in tree nut acreage. And if you think about, sorry, I got to get better control of my slides. So if you construct an index of acreage, where in 2000, acreage for all the crop index is 100, you can see that pistachios have grown at an annual rate of 7.5%, almonds at 4.5%, and walnuts at an annual rate of 3.2%. And again, this reflects market demand. Consumers, beginning, it seems like in 2000, really wanted to eat better, and almonds, pistachios, and walnuts have benefited from that. And California growers produce all the walnuts, pistachios, and almonds that we have. Export opportunities are there. So you really see a tremendous growth in acreage of these tree crops. And it's that kind of decision making by California growers responding to market demands is how you should think about citrus and how citrus fits in with California agriculture. So I just tried to create some summary slides to kind of think about how citrus fits in. So these are big changes in California agriculture. I mean, if you look around the rest of the country, you simply don't see such a large changes in a relatively short time. I mean, almonds acreage has increased by about 700,000 acres. And on the flip side, you see cotton acreage going down by 700,000 acres. And you see pistachios growing, walnuts. You actually see dairy silage for dairy industry growing. You see mandarins growing, wine grapes growing. And then you see some stagnation here with lemons, navels, and Valencias, a little bit of a drop in acreage, and then field crops growing down. So all I want to do is to introduce this is just to talk is just to make sure people understand that citrus is competing for scarce water, not so much land, but water and labor in California. So when you put it on percentage basis, you just see 600% increases for mandarins, and you can see the other crops there, just to put it on a percentage basis. So, Mehdi, I just wanted to, introduce a little bit of the dynamism and a little bit of background with citrus, but it's really more of a story of all of California agriculture. And so it's not just citrus where this has been affected.
Thank you very much. This is super interesting. And can you explain a little bit why California growers have changed the mix of citrus crops that they grow?
Sure. Well, economists say, or people, you could come up with a tautological answer, and that's what economists do. They say, well, growers are going to grow what they can make money at. So if you break down a profit for growers on a per acre basis, you look at price, you look at yield, and you look at cost of production. And all three have an impact on what growers grow. But I would look at almost all the crops that California growers grow. The yields have been increasing over time due to better management and better varietals. But relative yield changes don't really explain how what California growers have grown. It's more on the demand side, which shows up as price, and it's on the cost side. So look at that just for a little bit. So if you look at inflation adjusted prices for mandarins versus navels, it tells a pretty clear story that the real price or inflation adjusted price for mandarins has been growing over time, and the inflation adjusted price for navels has been flat. So if you take costs out of the equation, you would expect more mandarin acreage to be grown. And in fact, that's the case. And that just reflects higher consumer demand, leading to higher prices for growers. If you look at lemon prices versus almonds and walnuts, it tells, so you go back to the trends, you saw lemon acreage kind of flat and almonds and walnuts growing, but in fact, lemon prices, inflation adjusted, have been growing faster than almonds and walnuts. So price is not the only story. You also have to look at the cost of production. And the primary cost of production that differentiates these crops, you got a large capital cost with the tree nuts and establishment costs, but in terms of production costs, it's really harvest cost and labor costs that are different between the crops. So I got a little bit of an example here. So if you look at the citrus crops, navels, mandarins, and lemons, and look at that, they have higher production costs, they have higher labor costs per acre, and they have higher harvest costs. And most of the harvest costs are actually labor costs, because you hand pick navels, mandarins, and lemons, and you don't hand pick almonds, walnuts, and pistachios. And you can see there's a big difference in harvest costs and labor costs that explain why growers. So a combination of rising prices for the tree nuts, but lower relative costs in terms of changes in costs over time, that labor costs have been going up in California. And that helps explain the story why we have the changes that we see.
Perfect. Thanks very much. We have seen HLB and it's going on in Florida, and then in California, we have seen some of those. So can you give us some background on the HLB disease in California citrus and its impacts on the industry?
Sure. Well, HLB, as you'll learn a little bit, the next speaker in Florida, it's a devastating disease. It was first detected in California citrus, on residential citrus, in 2012. And so we've passed 9 years. Everyone thought once California found HLB that it was going to immediately spread into the commercial grows, because in Texas that's what happened, in Florida that's what happened. That's not what's happened in California. We've had 9 years now, and there's been no confirmed cases of HLB in commercial grows. We have lots of detections of HLB in Orange, Riverside, and San Bernardino counties. And the citrus quarantines have been established to restrict movement of citrus, but it hasn't yet got into the commercial grows. So the impacts to date of HLB are really that growers have been spraying to control the vector. So we have higher insecticide costs, applications on citrus. You also have added costs for tarping loads of citrus to help prevent the spread of HLB. You've also had higher costs from more complicated logistics about moving citrus from groves to packing house, and you have higher costs of assessment. So the real impact of HLB so far have been higher costs for citrus, which again works in favor of other crops. Oops, sorry. And so the question becomes, why don't we have HLB in commercial groves yet? Because in Texas, it happened, in Brazil it's happened, wherever citrus is grown and you have HLB, they find it spreads. Well, it could be that we just haven't found it, although people have been looking for it, but there is an incentive not to find it, because if you find it in your grove, you've got to quarantine and you've got to remove trees. So it really depends, it shows the importance of early detection on doing that. But it also may be that the climate simply isn't suitable for Asian citrus psyllid for reproduction of the psyllid, which is the vector that spreads the disease. We have cold winters, especially in the Central Valley, but also in inland, in the desert and in Riverside. And you have hot summers, that might not be too conducive. So it may be that California citrus is going to dodge a bullet just due to climatic factors. But it also could be that the California growers, because they've been proactive in cooperation in terms of area-wide management of the Asian citrus psyllid, that in fact that it's been the management that has kept it down. So regardless, I think California was hoping that we can dodge that HLB bullet, but only time will tell. But the research has shown that the cooperative management between growers and the institutions that have developed to facilitate that cooperative behavior may well have been quite positive in keeping down the spread of the disease.
Perfect, thank you. Congress has allocated substantial funds to help the citrus industry in its fights against HLB. What is the justification for spending public dollars helping a private industry?
Sure. Well, I'm in the School of Public Policy, so at UC Riverside, and so we're always looking about, what's the proper use of taxpayer funds to intervene in marketplaces. And so why is it a good idea to fund HLB control? Well, a proper role for government is to fund public goods. And basic research is a public good, and that is underfunded by the private sector. So to the extent that those taxpayer money is going to fund novel basic research to help control HLB, that's a perfectly good use of taxpayer money for that. Also, government may be serving as an agent for consumer interests, because consumers like citrus, and consumers can't kind of get their act together, act collectively, fund control efforts to save citrus. And so there may be a role for government to play as an agent to protect a product that lots of consumers enjoy. So if you think about the value, do a cost benefit analysis. So we can think of spending taxpayer dollars to save citrus. What is the benefits on the other side? Well, we can look at the producer benefits and we can look at the consumer benefits. So the producer benefits really are that producers can make more money. If to the extent that producers can make more money from citrus than from other crops, then the relative increase in profits that they can get from citrus is the benefit from saving citrus. It's not the revenue that is generated by citrus, but it's more how much extra can they produce by producing citrus rather than having to produce other crops. And so I calculated that in an earlier study I did at about $500 million per year. And if you go to the consumer side, the consumers benefit from citrus because it's a good product that they like to consume. But when you think about what value that is saved by saving citrus, well, you got to calculate the consumer value by looking at what their willingness to pay is for citrus relative to other crops. And I calculate, or other goods, and I calculate that kind of extra amount of value that's generated by having a robust citrus industry and products out there at about a little over $1 billion a year. So you can see that you add the producer value and the consumer value of 1.7 billion. You know, that is partial justification for for taxpayers getting involved in saving the citrus industry.
Thank you, Bruce. This is very interesting. California, as you mentioned earlier, has California citrus is facing other challenges like labor and water. Can you give us a little bit more on some of the future challenges facing the industry in California?
Well, immediately, I think the concern is HLB, because where the detections are in Southern California, that the #1 concern of the industry still is the spread of HLB in the commercial groves. And if it's going to spread, it seems like it's going to spread into places that are hospitable for the psyllid, and that's more the coastal areas. But again, so people are waiting to see if that's going to happen. But also a big concern is the labor cost and availability. California has adopted, been a leader on trying to raising minimum wages and treating agricultural workers as regular workers by having them qualify for overtime pay and things like that. So the California legislature is phasing in regulations that are going to increase the cost of labor to California agriculture. But the cost of labor would have been going up even without the California legislation, just because the availability of labor in California has been going down, both because of more restrictive immigration, but also an aging labor force, agricultural labor force in California. And of course, in California, you don't have agriculture without irrigation. And so water availability and the regulations and the uncertain, the weather, the overdrafting of groundwater supplies that is going to have to come to an end because of Sigma. So those are all there and big challenges. But I think the biggest challenge in the medium term is how can citrus and other crops successfully market their products to consumers so that they can increase demand. I think the story of California agriculture is California growers will grow things that consumers demand. And if citrus is going to be a viable in the future, they're going to have to grow demand, in particular for navel oranges. Is there a story to be told about how mandarins for navel oranges? And so the question that I'm trying to answer in my research program is, can citrus compete with other crops when you have a future of restricted availability of groundwater, which means that the total amount of water available to California agriculture is going to go down. And you've got to look at more than the water intensity of the crop. You need to look at the demand side to determine which crops are going to compete for that water. Growers will grow what consumers want to buy. And so what we're going to see is that competition for water play out in the consumer side of things. And so investment in growing markets, whether domestic or internationally, really will determine whether citrus can compete for that available water.
Thank you very much, Bruce. Everyone, please, if you have questions for Bruce, submit it through the Q&A function or chat box, and then we'll have it at the end of the discussion. And now I will turn it to Brittany to lead a discussion with Ariel about citrus in Florida and how they have been managing HLB disease. Brittany, the floor is yours.
Thanks.
Ariel.
Thanks, Mehdi and Bruce. So yeah, we'll go ahead and just jump right in with Ariel. So Bruce did a really great job giving us an overview of, the California citrus industry and some of the different things that are impacting the industry at this point. But I was just wondering if you could give us, some background on the Florida citrus industry and how does it, compare and contrast with California's citrus industry?
Good morning. Yes, thank you. Let me share the slides that I have prepared for today. So can you all see that?
Yes.
Okay. So historically, Florida and California together have accounted for over 90% of the citrus production nationwide. However, as Bruce mentioned, there is a very notorious difference between the use or marketing of the production in each of the states. So while what we have in this graph is the fresh percentage of citrus production, both in Florida and California, denoted by the red and blue lines. And what you can see is that while California has been producing most of its citrus for the fresh market, 80% every year, the situation in Florida is quite different. Roughly 10% every year is going into the fresh market. And what that means is that 90% of the production in Florida goes into processing, that is into orange juice.
Okay. Great, thanks, Ariel. So Bruce mentioned that, the Florida industry had been pretty devastated by HLB. And so I was wondering if you can talk more specifically about how, Florida's industry has been impacted by this devastating disease.
Certainly. So what we have in this particular slide is citrus production, again, both in Florida and California. And again, what we have in red is California's production. And what you can see is that it has been pretty steady. In fact, it has a slight upward trend in starting in 2010 or around there. And given that acreage has been steady at 270,000, basically what has happened is that is an increase in yield. It could be either due to the increase or improvement in technology, or maybe the yield of these varieties that Bruce mentioned have switched away from Valencia and going into lemon. Lemons produce a lot more than Valencias, so that could also be the reason. Now, in terms of what has been going on in Florida, the situation, as you can see from this particular slide, is quite different. The industry has been hit pretty hard by a number of shocks, and the first of which were back-to-back hurricanes in 2004. We had Charlie, Frances, Ivan, and Jean all hit the state within about a month and a half. Then in 2005, there was Wilma, and then in 2006, there was a freeze. So after all of those weather shocks hit the state, production started to go up back again, but the red vertical line is showing the discovery of HLB in Florida. And so you can see that production never really went all the way to what it used to. In fact, it started to decrease quite steadily year after year. Then again, in 2017, we had Hurricane Irma. And even though production went up again just a bit, really this year again, California is going to be ahead of Florida in production. Since production is basically the multiplication of acreage and yield, let's take a quick look at that to see how that has changed. In this particular slide, what we have is orange bearing acreage in Florida. And so even though the decrease in acreage had started before in the mid and late 90s due to citrus canker and real estate development, that decrease in acreage has intensified when HLB was found. So you can see there were 550,000 acres. Now there are 350,000 acres. In terms of yield, you can see that for Valencia oranges, which unlike in California, it is still in Florida the variety of oranges that is grown the most, because people don't have to peel it, they just juice them. So what you can see in this particular graph is that yield in boxes per acre was between 300 and 400 boxes before HLB was found, and it is now below 200. So roughly it is, almost half of what it used to be. And what you have in purple, in those purple bars, is the fruit drop, which is one of the symptoms that HLB causes, that has roughly doubled since HLB was found. You can see it was around 15%, and now it's around 30%. In terms of cost of production, the impact has been quite significant again. This is the real cost of production for processed oranges, and the gray bars denote the cost per acre. This is measured on the vertical left-hand side axis, and it used to be 1,200 and it reached 2,100 and then started to come back a little bit. But what is interesting to me is that the cost of production per box has increased even more in percentage terms than the cost of production per acre, which increased roughly 70%. So the cost of production per box used to be $283 before HLB was found. And if we ignore this year, which was the one in which we had Hurricane Irma, we can see that the cost that year was $11 per box. So roughly almost a 300% increase in terms of boxes. As a consequence of all this, it is not surprising that profitability of citrus, particularly oranges, is compromised. You can see that that green line, which denotes revenue, has been below the red line, which denotes the total cost, for quite a few years now, and it has even reached levels below the yellow line, which denotes the cost of caretaking for the growers. So given that that has been the case, again, it is not surprising that the number of growers in Florida has decreased quite significantly from around 7,400 to 2,775 in 2017. And this is from 4 years ago. Probably by now there are less than that. And this downsizing of the industry has occurred not only at the grower level, but also at the processing level. You can see in this particular slide that there used to be 42 processors in 2000, 2001, and there were only 14 in 2016, 17. The same is true for packing houses. There used to be over 100, and in 2016, 17, there were only 26. By now, there are probably 10 or less. So long answer, but hopefully I addressed the question that you had.
Yeah, thanks, Ariel. That's, I guess the devastation that Bruce described was fairly accurate after seeing all of that. Mm-hmm. So yeah, the growers are really struggling then, as I understand, and obviously the processors as well. But I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit more about how the industry was trying to prevent the spread of HLB, and has it been effective?
So the industry has tried quite a few different things. The first thing that they tried was to use foliar nutritionals. And the idea behind this was to try to bypass the blockage of the vessels of the tree that the disease causes. And so, as you can imagine, the expenses in terms of foliar nutritionals increased quite a bit. And so I have this one slide that shows just that. It compares the cost of production for processed oranges in Southwest Florida, and the blue bars denote the expenses in 2003-04. The red bars denote the expenses in 2018-19. So you can see that basically the the expense in foliar sprays went from $132 per acre to $584. Also, you can see, since we have this slide up, fertilizer has increased quite a bit as well. That is more recent as growers try to spoon feed the trees with liquid fertigation as opposed to ground fertilizer. So I put a question mark there on foliar nutritionals just because the scientific evidence is controversial about whether it works or not, but definitely it has not been able to offset the impact of HLB on the trees. The next thing growers tried was thermotherapy, which basically means that they expose the tree to high temperatures to try to reduce the amount of bacteria, just like we develop fever. The problem is that not all of the bacteria gets treated because it's still, the roots act as a reservoir of the bacteria. And it is also too expensive, so that did not work. The next one is foliar antibiotic sprays. And the way this worked was that the Florida Commissioner of Agriculture at the time declared a citrus crisis. The goal was to allow the use of antibiotics in foliar sprays to attempt to enhance the health of the trees, but that enhancement was not scientifically proven. In fact, in 2018, the CRDF discussed how the result of the trials they conducted showed that the foliar antibiotic sprays did not increase the yield of the trees. And I also put the links to some of the sources that explain how this works. Basically, the cuticle of the leaf does not allow the compound to penetrate and deal with the bacteria. So foliar antibiotics did not work. And actually, if you ask me, they shouldn't have been allowed to be used. The next one was citrus undercover production systems, or CUPS. And this is based off of the idea of a scientist here that decided to cover an entire acre of citrus and exclude the psyllid. So it does work. The problem is that it comes with a high tag cost. The cost of developing something like that is $43,000 per acre. Some growers here have been able to reduce that, but it's still around $30,000 or so. The study that I conducted shows that it is profitable. Here I'm showing the internal rate of return for different cost structures in the horizontal axis. You can see going from 30,000 to 45,000. And also for two different cases, when the grower gets insurance and when the grower does not get insurance. This is for the structure because it is a big deal here in Florida due to hurricanes. So it does work. I put a green dollar sign just because it's quite expensive. High density plantings is the next one on the list. The idea behind this is to plant more trees to the acre to be able to at least try to offset some of the impact in terms of lower yield per tree. And again, I did a study on this. I put just as an example the results in terms of internal rate of return for different scenarios for a tree density of 220 trees. But I also put the link at the bottom of the slide if anyone in the audience is interested in seeing the entire results. So again, it does work, but it can be quite expensive. And the last one on the list is area-wide pest management, which basically, as probably all of you know, just means working cooperatively to coordinate psyllid sprays.
All right, awesome. Thanks for that overview. Quick question about the high density plantings. So to me, and I guess I don't know how this disease spreads, so maybe this is irrelevant, but like if you have more trees per acre, doesn't that mean you're just at like higher risk for it more rapidly spreading? Or is it just, if it's in your orchard, it's in your orchard and you just deal with it?
So right now it's everywhere. I mean, there's no, I analyzed some data just recently, and it takes 3 years for trees to start to bear fruit. By the time they start doing that, they are already infected. So really, at this point in Florida, it does not really make a whole lot of difference.
Okay, thanks for answering that for me. Yeah, so you mentioned this when you were talking about your area-wide pest management. So I know you've done some super interesting research with growers about their willingness to cooperate. So I was wondering if you could, talk a little bit more about this research and tell us what you found in that study.
Certainly. So basically, just to give a brief overview, due to pest mobility, neighboring growers share the pest. And so what that means is that the damage is dependent not on the local farm pest population, but on the regional pest population. So the premise underlying area-wide pest management is that it is more effective to control the pest population of an entire area compared to farms doing it on their own. In Florida, they tried doing this in a program called Citrus Health Management Areas, or CHIMAs. And this was created in 2010 as part of the plan to try to address HLB. And what they were was voluntary, this is important, voluntary groupings of growers to coordinate insecticides to try to control the psyllid across neighboring groves. Of course, the first question is whether this kind of tactic would work. And so I had the chance to analyze some data from a grower who was doing everything the same. The only difference in his operation was that he had groves in two areas, one in which people were coordinating and one in which they were not, or not as much. And so the results of that are summarized on this particular slide. So what you can see is the lines denoting the yield in CHIMA 1 and CHIMA 2. CHIMA 1 was the one coordinating less than CHIMA 2. And it's interesting to see that starting in 2011-12, yield started to decrease in both, but the rate of that decrease was much steeper in CHIMA 1, which was coordinating less compared to CHIMA 2. And the gray bars measured on the vertical right-hand side axis are showing the differential revenue that he was able to achieve in that CHIMA 2. So what this was interesting for was to compare it to what we should find as economists when we see this kind of result. One should expect that growers would join the CHIMAs if they are providing more benefit compared to the cost. But it was interesting actually to find that there were 55 CHIMAs, but only 20 of those were active. So I was curious, and what we did was to conduct a survey at a grower meeting to collect data on this particular topic. The first question I asked them was, are you participating in CHIMA? So 62% of the growers said that they did. And so what I asked them next was, okay, to what extent do you participate? And what they said was, well, I participate 100% of the time, but those were only 40% of the growers. And what that means is that the majority of them, 60%, were not. And so the question is, why is it that there was so much disparity? And so as part of this survey and this choice experiment, I tried to better understand what were their decisions, what were the factors that were behind those decisions, what drives participation, was coordination with neighbors an issue, or it was just because of other things. And so basically what I did was to present both participants and non-participants with different statements, and they had to answer whether they agreed or not with those statements. And so here it goes first for non-CHIMA participants, what were the reasons for not participating? So the first statement was neighbors do not participate. And you can see that the majority, 57%, agreed that what this means is they do not participate because they believe, correctly or not, that their neighbors are not participating. Maybe it was because it was too much effort to coordinate, but you can see that the majority, 43%, disagreed. Maybe it was too costly, but again, 43% disagree with that. Maybe it was no longer useful to spray, but again, 45% in this case disagreed. But you can see that in this particular one, 50% agreed with the statement that they prefer to spray in their own timing. Maybe they were planning on exiting the industry, but they strongly disagree with that, 75%. And even though the opinions were more divided, still the majority, 35%, disagreed that the benefit in terms of yield was not worth it. So again, the top two reasons for them not to participate was that they believe their neighbors were not doing it and that they preferred to do it at their own pace. Then we asked similar or presented similar statement to participants, in this case, in terms of obstacles to increase the effectiveness of area-wide pest management. And again, we found that the majority, 53%, agreed that the main obstacle is that neighbors do not participate. They somewhat agree that it is too much effort to coordinate, that it is costly to spray, that it is decreasingly effective, and that the benefit is decreasing. What is certainly clear from these responses, though, is that the lack of coordination has been a major obstacle for the correct operation of CHIMAs, both for participants and non-participants. So what this suggests is that their beliefs about the actions of their neighbors are a key consideration in their own pest control decision-making. And you know, I did conduct the experiment to learn more about the choices. I don't have enough time to go over that, but I will quickly summarize the findings. There are basically three deterrents that we found to coordination. The first one is the coordination threshold, which is the minimum number or percentage of participants needed for that successful coordination. The belief about others, as we just saw, influences the likelihood of growers to coordinate sprays. And finally, risk aversion. If growers dislike risk, they will be less likely to coordinate sprays. Again, it was a kind of long answer, but hopefully I addressed the question.
Yeah, thanks, Ariel. That's really interesting. So Bruce already touched upon this a little bit, but I'm wondering if you can discuss, you know, what your thoughts are if there's a role for government to play with regulation for HLB in terms of, you know, payments, or maybe even like you're talking about here, maybe some mandatory sort of these area-wide management programs. So could you talk a little bit about that?
Yes. So I do believe that there is a role for government. So again, let me step back a little bit. So because the vector of this disease is mobile, when one follows only site-specific management practices, basically that is ignoring the collective nature of this problem. The choices and behavior of individual growers impact not only their own profit, but also the choices, behavior, and profit of others. So the ability of individual farmers to control the psyllid and HLB depends on the actions of neighboring growers. And when we face this kind of problem, it's a public good dilemma. And it's well known that markets fail to allocate resources efficiently when we face this kind of problem. So typically, when we're dealing with public goods, the government is the provider. Think of lighthouses, national defense, and highways. What is interesting is that neither at the federal, state, or county level in Florida, there have been any significant governmental effort to deal with this nature of the problem. And so what we see is basically the consequence of that. And when we have this kind of problem in agriculture, typically the way of dealing with it is with the top-down regulation or with collective action. So again, the implications of all this, particularly for the case of area-wide pest management, is that it is necessary to replace that voluntary component with a mandatory one. What we propose is to use a combination of regulation and collective action. That is to use the regulation to create a collective action, perhaps by requiring processors and packing houses to provide documentation that the fruit has been sprayed in a collective way, and they would require that in turn from the growers. So growers would need to organize themselves to spray collectively, perhaps by charging or assessing that on a per acre basis.
Okay, thanks for that. All right, so now for the most important question of the day. So what lessons can the California citrus industry learn from Florida's experience, do you think?
So I think they can learn quite a few things. First and foremost, I think that HLB could cause significant changes in California's citrus industry, just like it did in Florida. I think also that this is an interdisciplinary problem involving both biology and socioeconomics. And again, this idea that following only site-specific pest management practices will ignore this problem that the disease causes, that is a public good or a public bad. And importantly, the impact that I hopefully shared or was able to convey with you that it has done in Florida illustrate the consequences of this non-cooperative behavior. We saw that the area-wide pest management program can contribute to mitigate the losses of the disease, but when the growers do not coordinate, they unintentionally impose a cost on those who do. So I believe it is key, and California is still in time to develop policies, institutions, and incentives to deal with the disease. Those would still be valuable, even if the genetic modification of trees would be the long-term solution. There's a need for integrating the GM crops with pest monitoring and IPM practices. And there's also a need to create networks of farmers to incentivize their cooperation in dealing with pest and disease management.
Yeah, I think those are all really, really good and important lessons. So thanks for giving us your perspective on things from Florida. So now I believe we're going to turn it over to Ellen to sort of facilitate the audience Q&A, which I've seen a lot of questions come in. So Ellen, I'll go ahead and turn it over to you.
Thank you. Yeah, I'll start working through some of these questions, and if folks have more, feel free to enter them into the Q&A. I want to start with a couple of questions that came up in the chat related to organic citrus production. So Bruce, if you know off the top of your head, like sort of what the share of citrus in California is organic, and whether or not you could speak to sort of cost of organic. There was a question, how does the cost of production, how is it impacted by organic farming? And this is related to another question of whether or not organic citrus is more susceptible to HLB than inorganic. So maybe we could touch on the set of questions related to organics first.
Well, it'll be a short answer because I don't really know. But the organic share is small for citrus. The organic production is not less susceptible to HLB. The price received for organic production is higher, whether or not it offsets lower yields or from, I would presume it's lower yield, but I don't even know that. So I really don't know a whole lot about it. So, but I do know that organic production is not a prevention against HLB.
Ariel, anything to add there? Should I move on?
I do not have much else to say other than it does get affected. They have even fewer tools to try to deal with it because they do not use insecticides as much. So
thanks. Okay, so the question is, do you see a changing climate impacting the presence of new pests or disease in the citrus industry, and are growers financially equipped to deal with that issue? Open to either of you.
Well, you're seeing the climate change, you're seeing climate change affect the crop mix that you're seeing in the San Joaquin Valley. You see a lot more lemons production going in there where it used to be focused either in the desert or in the coastal areas. But the lack of freezes in the San Joaquin Valley have made lemons more viable. Now, and you'll see a different mix of pests come in. So if you continue to see an evolution, a co-evolution between climate change and pests, and do growers have the wherewithal to answer that question, you really have to think about agriculture as a dynamic industry. So if you have new pests come in and they have higher costs of production and the demand is not there for that crop or it's shrinking, you're going to see that crop accelerate faster out of production. So you can't really look at it from a static point of view. You need to look at it from a dynamic point of view.
Anything to add, Ariel?
No, not really. I think the answer that Bruce gave was clear.
Great. So the next question has to do with homeowners in California and whether or not HLB is detected in citrus trees in their backyards. What would be the implications of that?
Well, the direct implication is if the state finds that you have HLB on your tree in the backyard, they come and rip it out, and they rip out all your trees, and then they're going to spray all your neighbors. So that's the short run. The long run impact, I've not seen any studies done in terms of the value of citrus trees in backyard production. It's roughly half of California houses seem to have citrus trees in their backyards. And so in part, that's good because everyone likes fresh fruit going out in their backyard, and that really creates value for consumers. But it's really bad for the commercial citrus industry that's trying to control HLB because the homeowners don't manage HLB. So there's two sides to that. I'm all for homeowners having citrus, but they're not managing citrus, and it is a threat to commercial groves.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Great, thank you. Okay, the next question is about marketing orders. Bruce, you had mentioned that the federal marketing orders, like for lemons, put more of the crop into processed fruit. Would state boards or commissions have the same effect, or are there ways for them to collectively market without restricting fresh supply?
Well, if your only tool is to cut a marketed supply in order to raise price, and that was the traditional way they marketing orders used to say, well, we just want to meet the market demand. And so meeting the market demand, really you translate that is we need to cut supply in order to raise price for producers. And the way you do that is that you put on restrictions on the amount that will enter the fresh market. That's the only way you can do it. Now, if a marketing order was set up in order to actually expand demand, then you could have a marketing order that wouldn't need to cut the supply. So it's really, is your marketing order there to expand demand, or is it for supply management? And traditionally it's been supply management, and in the long run, that just doesn't work.
Thank you. Yeah, Ariel, anything else?
No, I'm not too familiar with marketing orders, so I don't have much to.
Okay. This next one, the questions were coming in the order of the talk, so most of those were directed at Bruce, but now we have some that are specifically for you, Ariel, and if Bruce, you have anything to add, feel free to chime in. So the question is, where do you look to find information on the number of processors and how this changes over time? And has this been consolidation or just completely dropping out of the industry?
So the data is coming from the Florida Department of Ag and Consumer Services. They do a report, I think it's every year. And there has been some consolidation, but I mean, going from 100 to 26, that is really just a lot of them, or the majority of them, just dropping out. Again, because they don't have much to work with. I mean, production has just taken such a hit that they don't have anything to go through their facilities to encourage them to keep their doors open.
Thank you. Okay, this is another question directed at you, Ariel. if total costs of Valencia production have exceeded revenue for a number of years now, what does that mean on the ground for the growers themselves? Are they taking out loans to get by in the hope that things improve? Do they have sources of other income to subsidize their business in the interim, or have you observed an exodus?
So basically what that means is that on average, they're losing money. And so many of them may ask for loans, but they can only do that for a number of times, and that is limited. So basically the slide that I showed, that there's a significant amount of growers that have been exiting the industry, summarizes what is going on. I mean, basically it's just, not profitable to grow citrus in Florida as it used to. And so that is why the industry is getting smaller and smaller.
The next question has to do with, I think, costs to treat HLB. What's the maximum per acre a grower could spend?
So I guess the maximum that they will be willing to spend is anything that they are not spending already on other things to take care of their trees, and a minimum difference that they want as a return. So I don't know, it would be $1 if you want to call it that, but just a minimum amount that they would be willing to earn to keep doing what they're doing.
Mm-hmm. The next question is, do processing or packing houses help control cooperating growers in the chimas? That is, growers not controlling ACP HLB levels.
No, they are not. That was something that I used as a proposal to try to deal with the problem and try to make it a solution. Like, the industry has been impacted at all levels, at the grower level, at the industry level. So I was just trying to find a recommendation for what could be done to create that mandatory component that is necessary to make sure that your neighbor is doing it and you are doing it, so you will do it. I don't know if that was clear, but it was a proposal to deal with the problem.
Great, thank you. And as one final question, I'm curious if both of you could sort of speak to the international market for citrus. It's certainly relevant to all these trends, and both on the price and cost side for California and domestic production, and but it was something that sort of neither of you touched on, and so I'm just curious if you could share a little bit about sort of who the bigger players are in citrus worldwide, and like how that's affecting prices for California, comparative advantage if you're seeing some of the challenges for California be labor costs or water costs, and just sort of, generally if either of you could opine on sort of the international market for citrus.
Well, I'll start. U.S. is a net importer of citrus. We import an increasing amount of lemon. The increased demand that we're seeing for lemons has largely been met by increased imports. And so import competition is real. The extent to which HLB is going to affect the other countries' citrus production, they have it in Brazilian orange groves. Argentina is trying to keep it out of their lemon groves, but we're a net importer. If we could expand export markets, it's not clear that we would be the country that was actually going to be the competitive producer to fill those export markets. So it comes down to both the relative cost of production compared to our competitors, but it's really a comparative advantage argument in terms of what crops are best suited, and do California growers have a relative advantage at producing, and then see if that at that relative advantage, if we're competitive with our competition overseas.
So I would add that the major competitors or the major producers of citrus worldwide are Spain and Australia. Both also have water issues. Spain has HLB at its doorstep because it was already found in Portugal. Australia is the one that has the biggest advantage, because just like it did with COVID, it's able to screen its borders better. But then there's also the largest producer of oranges worldwide is Brazil. They also have HLB. But what has been different is that the industry there is different. They have much larger farms. I mean, they have 18,000 continuous hectares. So they are able to manage this in a better way compared to industries in which the acreage is more dispersed, I guess. So what I'm trying to say is that the disease will eventually get everywhere. It's just a matter of how it is managed and the way the industry reacts and what they do to try to deal with it. And I guess that in terms of what the solution would be to this disease, which is likely to be genetic modification, is the big question is whether consumers will be willing to drink orange juice that is GM or peel oranges that are GM, and to what extent they are willing to do that. The market is, of course, likely to split into GM and non-GM, but what is the premium going to be and all of that?
Thank you. So there have been a number of short questions that popped up in the chat while you were answering those. I don't know if you have the Q&A open, but is California still mostly a navel exporter? Do we export seedless mandarins? Are we a net exporter of fresh citrus during our seasonal period? And what are the major export destinations for fresh citrus? So a number of more specific questions about exporting. If you know that, I don't know, Bruce, if you'd like to start. Oh, you're muted.
We do export navel oranges. It's a relatively small share. We're primarily producing for the domestic market. And then we're a relatively minor exporter of seedless mandarins. We do export some, but it's, again, mainly the domestic market. We're a big importer of mandarins, and other countries do have seedless mandarins.
Thank you. Okay, another question that says, when it comes to HLB, are there any market failures?
So I think that has to do with what I said. And so there's not a market failure per se. The market failure is how we deal with the problem that the disease causes. That is the market failure that I see. Growers by themselves are not able to deal with the problem. They need to coordinate to be able to supply enough protection to the crop as a whole rather than individually. That was what I was referring to.
Let me jump in on that. I think the situation in California is different. The growers in California have been much more proactive in recognizing the need for collective action in terms of both bottom up and top down. And so the growers have formed management districts. They formed a disease prevention committee. They have cooperated closely with the regulatory agencies, the CDFA, and that has been a success story. It has not been a market failure solved by top-down government action. It's been both bottom-up and top-down cooperative action, which I think has shown California to be really at the, I don't want to say cutting edge, but being proactive at recognizing that the private sector and the government and the public sector both have roles to play, and that the productivity of efforts by both sectors are enhanced by cooperation.
Thank you. The next question, do you anticipate a monopoly of the citrus crop by only a handful of big players in the coming years ahead due to HLB spread?
Well, I'm not sure about a monopoly, but it certainly is in a lot fewer hands than what it used to be before.
Well, concentration of mandarins production is much higher than with navel orange production, and that I think may enhance the ability of mandarin producers to respond to market demands relative to more dispersed navel orange producers. Lemons fall somewhere in between of that in terms of concentration. So I think it's that's an open question about what's going to happen. Everyone has been predicting, for example, that the U.S. cattle industry is going to have lots of consolidation, but it's resistant to that, and it's still the cattle producers are the most independent livestock producers that we still have left, relative compared to the hog producers or the chicken producers, which have seen consolidation. So it'll be interesting to see what happens, but it won't be just an isolation for citrus. You will see, if you see consolidation trends, you'll see it among more than just citrus.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you. Quick question, what time of year are the peaks in orange imports?
Well, if you're talking navel orange imports, yeah, the season for navels is in California is, late November through April, May. And so other than that, and if you can cold storage them, then you can store them until, so that the off season would be in the summer months.
Great, thank you. And then Ariel, are the CHIMAs provided specific ACP HLB locations and activity levels to assist growers?
So the way they work is there was a CHIMA captain, which was a grower in general, and that grower would send emails for the other participants to spray within a certain time, and those were based on a calendar as well as on a monitor system that they had in place.
California has same grower liaisons who do essentially the same thing, and it's an effective tool to have peers, peer growers, if you will, or knowledgeable industry people be the kind of go between the scientific community and the production community.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Bruce and Ariel, for answering all these questions and for the great prepared discussion points. I'm going to pass it off now to Tina to wrap us up here. Oh, you're muted, Tina.
Thanks, Ellen. Thank you to Bruce and Ariel for participating today, and thank you to all of our guests on ARE discussions this last academic year. It has been a privilege and a pleasure to meet all of you and interact with all of you, even in this virtual world. We're going to resume ARE discussions next fall at the start of next academic year, but I'd like to encourage anyone who missed our live webinars to view the recordings on our website, arediscussions.ucdavis.edu. Thank you everyone for a great year, and we look forward to talking with you soon.